Members here today, and I'm happy to take any questions. The format when we go out into communities is highly interactive. So we have youth workers, those that are working with kids from those communities in conversation with each other, generating ideas, action steps that they want to take using the data that we share with them. So I know many of you are familiar with IYI. Our mission is to improve the lives of all children by strengthening and connecting the people, organizations, and communities that are focused on youth. So we are supporting youth organizations, youth workers to make sure they are equipped to do their jobs that they do every day with kids. There are over 1.5 million children living in Indiana, and our younger generations are more diverse than our adult populations, and they're inheriting a world very different from the ones that we grew up in. AI was not even a notion in anyone's eyes other than in the movies when I was a child, and today most kids are more proficient with AI technology than I can say I am as an adult. But it's also our job to prepare kids for that future. And that's why we do our State of the Child presentations every year, to have conversations about how our kids are doing and how we can support them as they grow and develop. For the past 31 years, IYI has been a part of the Annie E. Casey Foundation's Kids Count Network. We're one of 53 across the country. And the data in the data book comes from state agencies, the Department of Education, DCS, Department of Health, also from other public sources, the census and other large databases, so we can see how our kids are doing in comparison to those across the country. But the Kids Count Data Book is more than a bunch of numbers. It's a report card for us as adults. It shows us how we are supporting our kids, and it shows us where we have opportunities to do better. At the State House this past February, we shared the 2024 overall rankings for Indiana. Just 2 weeks ago, Annie Casey Foundation published their 2025 rankings, so I do have an update for you all from this spring. In 2025, Indiana ranks 25th in the country in overall youth well-being. That is an increase from last year's rank of 27th. For family and community, we're consistent with our rank of 31st in the country. For health, the health well-being of our kids improved from 32nd to 30th in 2025. And then economic well-being and education, our kids are ranked 11th in those two sets of data. And those are actually the highest that Indiana has been ranked in the past decade. So we've seen a lot of growth and improvement in the data that Annie Casey Foundation tracks related to the economic well-being and the education well-being of our kids. And I'm gonna share a lot of positive trends in the data today. Teen births are down, child poverty is at its lowest in a decade, youth employment is on the rise, but we are still seeing pressing concerns. Early child education enrollment remains low, food security is increasing, and the lingering effects of the pandemic are still affecting the learning and mental health of our kids. So the first set of data that we shared around the state this spring was around family and community. And one of those in particular that we were looking at was access to exercise opportunities, because whether you're an educator, a health professional, a community leader, all of our work impacts how healthy our kids are and how physically engaged they are. According to the CDC, youth age 6 to 17 should get at least 1 hour of physical activity each day. Access to safe and convenient exercise spaces like parks, trails, rec centers, and gyms significantly impact whether kids are meeting this guideline. And the availability of this space can break down socioeconomic barriers, promote active lifestyles, and improve both physical and mental health outcomes. So starting with some positives, from 2022 to 2023, 23.2% of Indiana caregivers reported that their youth aged 6 to 17 engaged in at least 60 minutes of physical activity every single day. That is higher than the national average of 19.5. So our kids in Indiana are getting more activity every day compared to the nation. When it comes to concerns about body weight, 21.6% of Indiana caregivers reported that their child was somewhat or very much concerned about their body weight, also lower, though, than the national average of 24.3%. And you can see here on the slide, Indiana in comparison to our neighboring states, there's less concern about body weight, shape, or size compared to neighboring states. We do still have challenges. 76.5% of Hoosiers had adequate access to locations for physical activity, which is a slight decrease from the previous year. However, that is 7.5%, sorry, 5.7 percentage points below the national average. So our kids in Indiana have less access to places to be physically active. 15.4% of our children did not live in a neighborhood with amenities such as parks, sidewalks, rec centers, and libraries. That is higher than the national average of 10.5. So we have a lot of kids that are active, but they don't necessarily have safe places in their neighborhoods to be active. Additionally, the number of students in Indiana that are attending their physical education classes all 5 days of the week declined from 24.8% in 2021 to 22.4% in 2023. And while we've made a lot of progress in keeping youth active, as you can see up here, this slide on the screen where Indiana is in yellow, they do not have as many safe places to play. The other data point that we shared this spring in family and community is around foster youth and foster care. And I know the commission works a lot in that space and spends a lot of time focusing on these kids. So again, starting with the good news. In 2024, there were 56.4% of children who exited foster care and were reunified with their families, an increase from 53.6% in 2023. That means that there are more families that are receiving the support they need to bring their child home safely. The time that it takes for children to achieve permanency has decreased from 828 days in January 2023 to 579 days in January 2024, a step towards reducing uncertainty and giving children the support they need. So those are a couple of positive trends. Up here on the screen, you see one of the negative trends or challenges that we saw in this past year. 18,371 youth experienced foster care in 2024. That marks a reversal in the decline that we have seen from prior years. So since about 2018, the number of youth in foster care have been steadily going down. This is the first year since then that we saw an increase. That is number per year. Yep. Yep. And this comes from the Department of Child Services is who we get this data from. This chart is small on the screen here, and I know that you have printouts, and it's also available in our data book online edition with other information on youth in the foster care system. We also look at permanency outcomes by type. So here you can see the difference in how kids are being cared for. And we go into a lot more detail by county also for these indicators in our data book, as well as looking at children with DCS cases by case type. We track this information every year. This is for 11 months of 2024, which was the most recent data that we have when we published our data book in February. So moving into our second domain, which is health. And as I shared for 2025, we have seen an improvement in health data overall for the state of Indiana, which is good news. And speaking of good news, one that is a big success story that a lot of youth workers in the state were excited about when we were sharing is that substance use among youth has declined to a 30-year low among our 7th to 12th graders. We heard a lot of stories from youth workers in the field about the work that they've been doing in that space. And so it was exciting to be able to share that difference is making an impact and that we're actually really seeing it in the data. So again, starting with that good news, and this data here is from the Indiana Youth Survey. Over the past 2 years, we've seen a decrease in reported substance use by students. Alcohol use in the past month has dropped from 10.9% in 2022 to 9% in 2024, and binge drinking has also declined slightly. Cigarette smoking is down. 1.5% of students reported use compared to 1.9% in 2022. Electronic vapor product use has also decreased from 9.4% in 2022 to 6.6% in 2024. Marijuana use has also declined slightly from 6.4% to 5.2% in 2024. Additionally, access to these substances is becoming more difficult for students. There are still challenges that our kids are facing. And one of the ways that we look at addressing those challenges is understanding what risk factors are present among 7th to 12th graders. So by looking and understanding this information and in relation to understanding the data around, and I'm going to talk about mental health in just a moment, with substance use and mental health, we know that those can increase the risk of addiction in adulthood. We know that they can lead to poor academic performance and higher dropout rates, and increased likelihood of accidents, injuries, and legal issues. But increasing our protective factors can help reverse those trends. And that is a lot of what we see when we're out in the field, our youth workers and youth organizations talking about the work that they're doing to protect our kids and to create supportive environments for them. Looking at the mental health of our kids over the past 6 years, so this information is also from the Indiana Youth Survey. We know that it's a critical aspect of students' well-being, impacting their emotional, psychological, and social development. Starting with some of the encouraging trends, again, from the most recent Indiana Youth Survey. Rates of poor mental health are declining. In 2024, 29.9% of students reported feeling so sad or hopeless for 2 or more consecutive weeks that they stopped their usual activities, which is the definition of depression. However, that is a decrease from 35.7% in 2022. I had a lot of conversations with youth workers in the field about this. It is fantastic that we have a decline, that our kids are feeling less depressed compared to how they were 2 years ago, but we also know that almost a third of our students reporting those feelings are way too many kids. So we are seeing positive trends, but I also want to acknowledge that any kids that are feeling depressed, that are considering or attempting suicide, is one child too many. There were fewer students that were considering suicide in 2024. 13.9% of students reported seriously considering attempting suicide, down from 17.2% in 2022. And again, fewer students were also making suicide plans. 10.1% reported making a plan to attempt, down from 12.8% in 2022. So this data is moving in a good direction, and a lot of that work is due to those youth organizations in the field, families, schools, and the whole support system that our kids have. We do still have challenges related to mental health. There are still gaps that we are seeing. One of those is that there are disparities when it comes to gender. Female students were twice as likely as their male peers to report experiencing poor mental health. This is consistent with prior years. Slide too far. Additionally, access to care remains a barrier. 59% of caregivers reported difficulties obtaining necessary mental health care data for their child, a rate higher than both the national average of 56.1% and higher than our neighboring states. Additionally, Indiana has the 13th highest rate of children under the age of 18 that are at risk for depression, with 14 per 100,000, and this ranking remains unchanged from 2023. So students are reporting that they're feeling less signs and feelings of depression. However, we can continue to rate the 13th highest state for kids that are at risk of having those feelings. Because mental health intersects with so many other key health indicators, collaboration between families, schools, healthcare providers, and policymakers is important. Early intervention and support can significantly improve outcomes for our youth. And then getting into our economic well-being data. Again, this is one of the domains for 2025 where Indiana is ranked 11th overall in the country, our highest in the past decade. Talking about child food insecurity first, because we know that it can have serious consequences on a child's health, development, and their academic success, which we're going to touch on next. Studies show that children experiencing food insecurity are more likely to struggle in school. They're more likely to face chronic health issues and deal with family stress due to financial strain. Additionally, many families facing food insecurity rely on low-cost processed food that lack essential nutrients for our children and also impact the health that we just talked about. So, some of the good news. There have been positive developments related to food insecurity. Federal and local programs continue to provide essential support, with approximately 70% of food insecure children eligible for federal nutrition assistance programs, and awareness and community driven efforts to address food insecurity have increased, with more focus on providing nutritious options. Despite that progress, Indiana continues to face some serious challenges when it comes to addressing child food insecurity. Nearly 2 in 10 children, 18.2%, in Indiana struggle with food insecurity in 2022, compared to 12.9% in 2024. That's a 39.5% increase year to year. An estimated 30% of food insecure children were ineligible for federal nutrition programs due to income limitations, consistent with national trends. And here we can see when we're looking at child food insecurity in comparison to our neighboring states, Indiana is the purple line, kind of goes right along there with Michigan's line in yellow. They overlap pretty closely. We're kind of there in the middle when it comes to child food insecurity in comparison to our neighboring states. 31.1% of households reported that while they could afford food, they lacked access to nutritious options, higher than the national rate of 27.4%. And looking here, we have some really good data in the data book that breaks down households' abilities to afford food. A lot of the youth workers that we share this data with in the field connected this to the kids and the families that they work with every day and help them understand more context around the kids that they're serving and the families that they are connecting with. Youth employment? Yeah, yeah. Mhm. From my understanding, I'll say that I'm not an expert first. I know that there was some summer food program funding that Indiana did not receive this year, but there are still many, many programs. I know I live here in Indianapolis. Indy Parks has their summer food program. There is still a lot of programs and food available for kids. I think it's just one particular streaming fund that definitely means that there were some kids that are probably going hungrier this year than they were last year. But there are still schools, youth organizations, churches, other places that are providing that food for kids this summer. Yeah, I used to teach second grade before I was at IOI, and so I dealt with a lot of kids that were in that situation in my classroom. All right, youth employment. I know youth employment is a big topic in the state this year, particularly as we're looking at the new graduation requirements that are rolling out and getting kids ready for that workforce development focus in their life after high school. And we've had some good news around youth employment. Indiana is making strides with youth employment. 39.4% of Indiana teens aged 16 to 19 were employed in 2023, which is higher than the national rate of 33.3%. Among teens enrolled in school, 34.7% of them were employed, higher than the national rate of 30%. Got a lot of kids in our state that are getting that hands-on real-world experience while they were going through high school. And 10% of Indiana's teens were neither in school nor employed. That's kind of our opportunity youth group. That is lower than the national rate of 11%, which is also good news. We've got more of our kids that are in school and or working. Despite these positive trends, we do have some significant challenges. 9.2% of unemployed teens in Indiana did not graduate from high school, exceeding the national rate of 7.3%. And these types of barriers emphasize the need for targeted efforts to provide access to jobs, skill training, workforce development programs, so that our youth are not just earning a paycheck, but they're getting real hands-on experience to prepare them for what they're gonna do in the future. And the basis of that is education. So diving into our education data next. Again, for 2025, Indiana ranked 11th overall in the country for education. the highest in the decade, and really good news in showing the progress that we are making as a state. So, starting with our youngest learners, research indicates that high quality early education programs provide significant benefits, such as a 40% lower likelihood of dropping out of school, long term economic returns with every $1 invested, generating over $8 in economic activity, and bridging gaps for children from low income families, leading to improved life outcomes. So, looking at some of these positive trends around Indiana's early education landscape, participation in pre K grew by 27.3% in 2023. So, the more kids getting access to early education. And the Early Learning Access Index improved from 60.6% in 2021 to 63.8% in 2024, reflecting steady progress. The Early Learning Access Index looks at four categories of how kids are able to get connected to early learning. And this data comes from our partners at Early Learning Indiana. So it's looking at capacity, quality, affordability, and choice. In all those categories, we've seen growth over the past several years. Despite that progress, Indiana does face challenges in early education. 40% of our 3 to 4-year-olds were enrolled in preschool in 2023. That is below the national average of 46%. So we're seeing more access becoming available, but we're not seeing as many kids able to get enrolled. Looking at our rural counties, they are experiencing a provider shortage, making it more difficult for many families to access care. This chart up here on the screen is the number of counties that align with Indiana's moderate access to care, that's in gray, compared to counties that do not have moderate access. And so the numbers on there, so 2024, for example, 27 of our counties in the state had moderate access, 65 of them had inadequate access to early childcare. Additionally, programs offering non-traditional hours have decreased from 28% in 2021 to 26% in 2024, limiting options for families who are working outside of typical work hours. And while we're talking about success, one data point that was celebrated this spring when we were out in counties around the state was Indiana's high school graduation rate for the class of 2024. This is the highest that it's been in a decade at 90.2%. So we're seeing more kids that are graduating on time and earning their diplomas. Additionally, we've seen the dropout rate decline. Fewer students are dropping out. The dropout rate decreased from 6.6% in 2023 to 5.8% in 2024. That means that more young people are staying in school and working towards their diploma, which we know has long-term benefits not only for themselves, but their families and the communities that they live in. We do still have challenges when it comes to education. Looking at graduation rates, while those have risen, 26 of Indiana's 92 counties still have graduation rates below the state average. That means that regional disparities persist, and some students are facing greater barriers to success than others. When we're looking at college enrollment, the numbers have stagnated. Only 52.8% of Indiana's 2022 high school graduates enrolled in college. That is a small decrease from the previous year of 52.9%. Additionally, students who graduate with a general diploma are far less likely to attend college, 9.9%, compared to those that are earning academic honors diplomas, where 85.5% of those students are likely to attend college. These statistics matter because they directly impact the future of our Hoosier youth, including their place in the workforce, their economic mobility, and their community well-being. Lower college enrollment rates may indicate affordability issues, lack of readiness, or a shift in career aspirations. But it's important that all kids are understanding the pathways and their options, whether it's college, vocational training, or other post-secondary pathways. One of the questions that we frequently get when we're sharing this data is whether or not we're able to get and track apprenticeship and vocational type of data. Unfortunately, there's not a good system for collecting that data right now. Imagine if a student were to graduate from high school and go on to become an electrician and go through the training for that. The electric companies are not required to report back. We had the student that graduated from high school and they came through their program. So there is a big opportunity. It's both an opportunity and currently a gap in understanding some of those other pathways that are not college related for our kids. But we got that question a lot because there's a lot of work that's being done in communities to support kids going through apprenticeships and trainings. So some of the resources that we have available include our Kids Count data book, which is available on our website. It includes all of the data that I shared this morning, but also it includes there's 60 key indicators that are broken down at the county level, and well over, I want to say, 500 other data points are included throughout the book. So I only shared a very small fraction of those. Additionally, we have a county dashboard that is also available. It's a companion piece to our data book. There are 5 indicators for each of the 4 sets of data that I covered today that are on that dashboard, and these can be filtered by county. So these are the tool that we take out into communities a lot. A lot of our youth workers, schools are using these to see how their county in particular is doing on a couple of key indicators in comparison to neighboring counties, or if they're serving kids in multiple locations. We also have a lot of youth workers and youth organizations that are using this information for program improvement, for writing grants, and other supports that they're seeking for their kids. So that covers the data that I have. I know that it was a lot of numbers, but if you have any questions, and I know there's time also for conversation amongst the group about any of the data that you heard this morning.
You say, I know it seems like there's quite a few improvements. Do you think you would relate that to the fact that Mark Fairchild is a director?
Absolutely. And I hope that that is captured in the notes. All right. Wonderful. Well, if you do have any follow-up questions, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to answer any of those, and I appreciate your time. I have one hard copy with me today if you would like it. If you would like some, Blaine, I can get you some hard copies that I can get you to pass out. Yeah, all right, wonderful. Thank you all so much.
All right, our next presentation will be our second data presentation from Colleen Saylor from the Court Improvement Program Data and Partnerships Program. She is our wonderful data analyst. So, Colleen.
Good morning and thank you. That was both impressive and highly encouraging data. And so I'm happy to report that the court data is going to track along some of those same trends. I want to give a caveat too that the data that was just presented, from my understanding, is mostly DCS data. It's collected a little bit differently than the way that we collect the court performance measures. And so I think it's helpful to understand that because you're going to see some of the same measures and they may not match. First off, the data that is collected by DCS is more of a current ongoing data. They're tracking what's happening right now with cases. We're an exit cohort data, which means that we get a list of cases where these particular cases closed within a time period that we assign, and then we look at all the pinch points and measures that fell into that case. So the sample size is typically going to be somewhat limited and specific. It's literally only cases that had a wardship termination within a time frame, but then looking back and saying, okay, when did they open? When did they close? When did specific hearings happen? So I think that's important to know as well. The other thing that's important is the difference in the measure of central tendency being used. We use the median, and that's very intentional because these are kids and lives, and the ability to look at a case and know that something is happening is great. But looking at the higher level numbers and trying to draw correlations can end up being challenging and sometimes not as helpful. We're trying to measure the practice on the general in these courts as they move a case through the process. And so it was determined that the best measure is the median, saying that, you know, you line all of the measures up from smallest to largest and you take that measure that's in the middle. This alleviates the impact that those outlier cases have. There are some cases that take longer, and they should take longer. They're complex, there are nuances, and we don't want that impacting the overall data. So just to clear up a little bit about how that may be different. The performance measures were initially created under Administrative Rule 1F. This was back in 2013, and then in 2015 was the first time that we were able to report them. At that time, we were reporting on 5 measures, and I have those listed for you. In 2017, 5 more measures were added. In 2019, 5 more measures were added. And then we took a break. It's a lot to ask individual counties to collect and report this data. They are required to submit it quarterly. So it's on a federal fiscal year. So we're only counting the wardships that terminated from October 1 of one year to September 30th of the following year. The report that I'm presenting on today is the federal fiscal year 2024. So we're talking about wardship terminations that happened between October 1st of 23 and September 30th of 24, to give you some context. Every time that we add a measure, we go through a process with a data advisory work group that was created that's made up of judges. And they help us make decisions about what measures are important to collect, what's the actual definition of those measures, and when to start reporting out on it. We frequently try and leave a lag time so that the 2025 data, we started collecting it, but we're not reporting on it until this next annual report, because we wanted to make sure that we had confidence in the data that's being presented back out. That gives us some time to make sure that there's not technical errors or things in the way that the data is being pulled and then presented back out. The report that I'm sharing with you today, I think everybody got a hard copy as well, is also posted. We recently posted it to the website. But some of the key takeaways are these measures that I have listed here. So median time to permanency has existed in this report from day one. It's one of the first and most important measures. It is the time from the date that the CHINS petition, the Child in Need of Services petition, is filed until the date that that wardship is terminated on the case. And so you can see the overall time to permanency from 2023 was 611 median days, and that has now dropped to 549 median days. The TPR orders that happen within 180 days went from 56% of the cases meeting that criteria to 63% meeting that criteria. We're also able to disseminate the types of wardship termination and then track those measures as well. So you can see reunification is the majority of the outcomes of the cases. 56% of all wardships that terminated in 2024 were for reunification. And the median time to permanency on those was 390 days. One of the items that's not tracked by court performance, but we have it at the Office of Court Services, is the number of CHINS cases filed. And so you can also see that that went from 9,843 cases to 12,744. So that's a pretty significant increase in the number of cases. And again, we're not going to see the impact of that on the court performance measures for a little bit of time, because those are cases that were opened in those dates. We're looking at the cases that close. So back to the median time to permanency, you can see the historical timeline on this. We went from 593 median days in 2021, had a little bit of an uptick in 2023, but we're declining again for the 2024. The 2025 first 2 quarters data is now available on the dashboard, which I'll kind of show you guys it later, but it's also showing that to continue to decline. Median days to adjudication measures the time from the date that that CHINS petition is filed to when there's an adjudication or a fact finding on that case. And we track, parents often have these dates separately. And so we track when the first parent had that adjudication or fact finding completed. And so you can see that the median time for the fiscal 2024 was 56 median days, which falls within the statute requirement of 60 days. The time to disposition is when those services get ordered. So again, we're tracking from the date of the CHIN's petition being filed until the date that the dispositional hearing takes place. And 82% of the cases in 2024 were within that 30-day time frame. And then it's also got the relevant codes if you're interested in looking those up. Another measure that we track that's really important, and it has become more important throughout the Child and Family Services Review and the Program Improvement Plan that we're collaborating with DCS on, is the timeliness of that first review hearing. When they initially completed the Child and Family Services Review, they found that this was an area that we needed to improve on. And so we started working really hard to make sure that that data was complete and accurate. And there are also some program improvement plan pilot projects that are happening around this that I'll get into later. But you can see that for 2024 data, 70% were held within that 6 months date. And where I think the confusion often happens is that it's 6 months from the date the child was removed from the home or the date of disposition. If we were to pull the data and look only at whether the cases are happening within 6 months, if that first review hearing is happening within 6 months of the date of disposition only, I think we would hit that 90% or more of the time. But because the courts have to make that determination as they're setting those hearings, hey, wait a minute, was this child removed before disposition or not? And then when does the hearing need to happen? I think sometimes that can cause some more complications to the process. The median days to first permanency hearing, 336. So that was for 2024, happening well within that 365-day statutory requirement. And then we get into the TPR, termination of parental rights information. We added a measure, as you saw in 2025, that's tracking the date that the TPR final hearing was taking place, because it didn't match, like what we were currently collecting didn't match the statute. So the statute's tracking that hearing date. What we were collecting was the order date. So what you have here is the median days to the filing of the TPR petition. So from when the CHIN's petition was filed to when the TPR petition was filed is taking a median of 485 days across the state in 2024. When you look at the next one, it's the date of TPR completion. So when the CHIN's petition was filed to when that final order was completed, and that's 683 median days. What we've added and is not included here is the hearing date. And so hopefully we'll be able to report back out on that next year. But at this time, 63% of the TPR orders have been completed within that 180 days of the TPR petition being filed. Yep. I'm not an expert on that part of it. I think it has more to do with the fact that the courts have an obligation to make certain that when that TPR hearing is held, that they have exhausted all efforts, that it truly meets the criteria. And so they're wanting to give families that time. So the TPR petition gets filed within a required time frame, and the families get notice that this is going to happen. But they also still want to continue providing that opportunity for them if there's a substance abuse issue or mental health conditions that maybe they haven't even had the opportunity to have access to services. They may be allowing that additional time to have that happen. And I don't know if Judge Kenworthy, you?
It's been pre-petition filing or between petition and order. Before TPR is filed, there's an assessment on services offered that families either utilize or are unable to complete, which is why it's the pre-filing. But it's just interesting to me that there's a TPR filing at 485 days, but the completion of that order is not until 650. Really, that's a large gap to permanency. So the termination petition is filed, and that triggers a whole new process. So due process is required in every termination parental rights case. So there's an initial hearing, advisement of rights, appointment of counsel, setting for hearings, and then when a fact-finding trial happens, that may take 2 hours, it may take 8 days. So it depends on the complexity of the case. And then by court rule, once that fact-finding trial is completed, the trial judge has to enter written findings of fact and conclusions thereon. And the trial judge by rule has 90 days to do that. And in practice, I can tell you that many judges are on the bench 5 days a week. And so they're writing those orders after hours at home. And so that's part of that lag time. Obviously, we don't like that. We don't like to let those things sit. But the short answer on that is due process does take time. But certainly there are ways that we can improve that.
Thank you for that, though. Thank you. This is duplicative of, I think, some of the information that was previously shared. It's showing you the outcomes. So you can see on this one that the reunification is 56% of the cases for 2024, adoptions 27%, guardianship 11%, and then your another planned permanent living arrangement and relative placement are both 3% of overall cases. So when we look at the next screen and you see the time frames, you can kind of look at that. So the majority of the cases are either reunification or adoption, and there's a pretty big disparity on how long those take. As a state, we are processing through reunification cases fairly quickly at 390 days. The adoptions take longer, and part of that is the process. And I think the next screen is going to also explain to you that Indiana's doing a pretty good job at trying not to create legal orphans. So I think that they're working hard to make sure that if a TPR is filed and adoption's a permanency plan, that there's a process and plan in place, and they're moving well towards getting that to happen. But you can see the remainder median days to permanency for those other permanency types as well. So this is the screen I was talking about. So we, as a court improvement program, have a region that we're assigned to. We're Region 5, and these are the states that are within that region. And you can see that Indiana's 51% of children that have had the parental rights terminated, and they're waiting for adoption. The only state that's doing better with that is Wisconsin at 47%. So I think that it's important that if the TPR is completed, that we have a plan and that we're moving towards it, as opposed to having a big pocket of folks that are sitting there and these kids don't have a home or a plan. In the bottom one, you can see that Indiana is also the highest for the number of adoptions that were completed. And this is 2022 data because it was gathered from the Children's Bureau, and that's the most recent that they had available. But you can see, and I think that was pretty consistent with last year as well, that Indiana's completing more adoptions than the surrounding states. This is looking at the time that these adoptions are taking. And so you can see this is an area for improvement as well. 15.3% of the adoptions in Indiana were completed within 24 months. I will say that the next bucket that they track was the more than 24 months, but less than 48. The majority of Indiana cases fell within that time frame. But you can see that there are other states that are doing better and one that's not doing as well. So the annual court performance measures report also provided information about what the court improvement program supports in what areas that we're trying to help and assist courts and communities across the state. And so this screen just gives you some of that information, that we supported financially 6 counties that submitted applications for projects or programs, and some of those were mediation. We had an upstream program. We provided some assistance for CASA legal aid, but basically there's an application process where if it meets the criteria, we have a team that looks at it and then makes a determination as to if we can fund it and if so, at how much. And then we also provide scholarships to judicial officers so that they can attend additional training or conferences that are child welfare related. And so that's listed there as well. We have spent an inordinate amount of time collaborating with other agencies with regard to the Child and Family Services Review and Program Improvement Plan. But as a result of that collaboration, we have had some fantastic pilot projects that have come out of that. The Quality Hearing Project is one of those. It is in 3 counties. And what we did was we contracted with some of our jurist in residence, which are senior judges that are assigned specifically to the court improvement program to help us with projects like this. And what they did is they had some training from a researcher to help listen to some hearings in these 3 pilot counties. The measures that were captured were based on some research that was done previously as to what quality hearings should contain. And so they were able to listen to these hearings, score them, and we have a researcher working on that data right now, and we're hoping to be able to present that later on in the year. But we're really encouraged by what the preliminary findings were as far as how courts in Indiana are holding hearings and the quality of those hearings. For the most part, there was a lot of those measures that they identify. If a court meets this measure or addresses this issue or has this conversation or engages in this way, then the outcomes for the children and families will be better. And so preliminarily, we were meeting a lot of that in the counties that were observed. So I think that's really encouraging. We did also update the interagency agreement. So this is an agreement between the Department of Child Services and the courts and probation that outline the responsibilities that each have with regard to cases where services or placements are provided financially by DCS. And so we updated those with all 92 counties, got signatures, and made sure that everybody was on the same page as far as what needed to be done. This also encompassed the probation prevention plan, which was something that was required in order for DCS to draw back down funding on some of those cases where they provided funding for placement. And then stakeholder meetings, which I'll get into a little bit better here. So the chief administrative officer for the OJA and then the director of DCS both submitted letters. The OJA was a memo and the DCS was a letter. But what these did was outline an overarching agreement that these cases are all of our cases. They're not just DCS, they're not just the courts, and that as a result, we need to work together among all stakeholders that touch the cases to come to some better understanding of maybe where the areas for improvement exist within the local community and where they're doing really well, and even some innovations that they might be able to share with others. And so these stakeholder meetings are an opportunity for the local groups to come together and have these conversations. And we've asked that they bring data. We initially supplied some data from the court performance measures report, as well as what we could get from DCS and dual status information so that they had something to talk about at these stakeholder meetings. But we also strongly encourage that each stakeholder that has data bring it to the meeting so that the conversations can be had about how they intersect and where the opportunities are for everybody to work together to make improvements to their local process as it relates to these cases. This is the court performance measures dashboard. And I don't know if you can see, but across the top, there are 4 different tabs. The first one is just this screen in median. So again, we like to present it in median because we think that's the best, most accurate way to share this information without having outlier cases impact it. But we also got a lot of feedback from other stakeholders that they are more comfortable with average. So we created tab 2, which has the exact same information, but it's an average. Tab 3 is permanency, and it shows a more focused view of just the permanency data. And then tab 4 is a county snapshot, which we felt would be helpful for these stakeholder meetings if the counties wanted to just click on that, view it. It's got historical data for their county. They can sort it that way, and then they can print it. But one of the great things about the dashboard is the flexibility. You can search it by year, and we go back to 2018, I think, in this data. You can search it by county, and everything's going to shift to that county for these measures, and then has the state comparison data next to it in each bar graph. And you can search it by DCS region. Again, we think this might be helpful for those stakeholder meetings where they're having a conversation about services provided only in that region and what the numbers represent. It gives them an idea of, who all is involved in that and how it may be impacting the numbers. And then lastly, it can be filtered by judicial district. And again, just to give folks another way to look at the data and compare to other locations and maybe seek them out. When you look at the dashboard, we took the coloring off on this one, but the map will color code to whatever you've selected. So if you're specifically interested in the time to adjudication and you click on that, it's going to shift the data and you're able to look at it and compare. Maybe your time to permanency isn't as great as some neighboring counties. You can have those conversations and maybe find out what they're doing differently. But hopefully that's a good resource for folks. We try and update that quarterly. It just got updated for Q2 data last week, I think. Some of the other resources that we provide are bench cards, toolkits. We've got a link to the dashboard. We have a link to the Children's Bureau data that was referenced earlier in the presentation, and then support, training, any kind of process or project that we can assist in. We're more than happy to at least look at it, and if not us, then maybe direct to the agency or division that would be most suited to helping with that process. So any questions? I know it's a lot of data 2 in a row, so hopefully it wasn't too much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to point out that Colleen does a tremendous amount of work in this project. And I was in the trial court at the time this data collection rolled out. And I can tell you trial judges were very enthusiastic about collecting this data. And I say that sarcastically because it's time consuming. So every quarter is an opportunity for each judge to look at every case that closed during that quarter over the life of the case. And so what this looked like for me was spending a whole day, often 8 to 10 hours of time on this data report each quarter, looking at what happened in every case. And by doing that, I saw problems in the system. And so this is an opportunity. The actual collection of the data is an opportunity for every individual trial judge to look at their system and say, we're making a mistake at this phase. It's an opportunity to call the stakeholders together and go upstream, like Colleen said, figure out how to fix that so that the cases that follow don't have the same problems. And so I think the data informs us in two ways. It informs us now because we can see trends, how we're doing year to year, but it's also showing us as a case is closing, how we can improve the system going forward. And so I can tell you that, at least for me, I'm definitely a believer in this process of collecting data because I've seen the value of it. I've seen the opportunity to improve at that granular level and then also talk about it at the state policy level. So, and Colleen also spends a tremendous amount of time helping individual counties improve their data collection. So that means teaching court reporters how to put in the correct code to pull hearing dates and things like that. So I can't emphasize enough that the value that we have here in the room with her. And similarly with IYI's data, this tells us a tremendous amount, not only in the report, but also in the collection. So thank you for all of that. We're going to pivot now to legislation. So I will call up our fearless leader, Mark Fairchild, to report on the legislative session.
All right, and I promise I'll be late on data but I don't know if legislation is going to be more exciting than data or not. But really, our data partners are great. I can't emphasize enough how much it informs us being able to do the work we do, because it really points us in the right direction of what we need to be tackling and going into. So as much as there's good and bad, when we can identify those things and look at them holistically through those data points, it really makes all the difference in the world. So I get to talk about legislation. Hopefully this is the last time you have to hear from Mark in legislation for a few months before we get back to the next legislative cycle. But we do have some good successes that I want to make sure we highlight coming out of the legislative session. So our biggest one for the year was House Bill 1098. And this had all of our legislators involved and engaged on it. I think everybody spoke or testified or supported or sponsored in some capacity. Of course, authored by Representative Devon and starting out in his committee. So this was our big lift to say, let's really look at how we can elevate all we've talked about with lived experience voices, youth, family, and caregiver voices, and put it front and center in state policy. So we brought this forward with a few specific items listed under it that we're going to make sure that we're doing over the next however many years, some of these starting actually already underway. So doing direct work on supporting youth representatives within the commission and within all of our task forces and committees. We still have the ongoing goal of making sure we have those lived experience voices throughout our entire commission process. So we have Alia and Julia here today, but want to make sure as we're forming and building recommendations, that's built in too. So we have it every step of the way. A big item that we'll be working on that's probably going to be about a 2-year project for the first version of it to get fully developed and out there is developing a statewide plan on family, youth, and caregiver engagement. This isn't just for the Children's Commission. This is going to be a starting point for all state agencies that are doing this work. How can we be doing that collectively and cohesively, developing some best practices, some model practices that we can put out there? How can we support other agencies that are in that space? Indiana is way ahead of the game as far as integrating those lived experience voices. When I talk to some of our other neighboring states, but like anybody else, when we're kind of looking at a population in a new way, we've got to make sure we do it the right way. And when we learn lessons, we make sure we pass those learnings on to others that are doing the same. So that's going to be a big item moving forward. We're going to continue providing and supporting educational opportunities, our different convenings and things we've done, special events that all relate to how we can get that engagement out there, but also so we can be advertising out to people that we are a state that's wanting to listen, that's wanting to engage, and we're here and present for you. We can't always wait for people to come to us. That's usually not at the good end of the process if we wait for that. Also, again, supporting other state agencies, community organizations, and encouraging that expansion of that engagement wherever we can throughout the state. And another item that was actually, we were asked by the Senate to add some additional language about making sure that we were actively soliciting feedback, very open and honest feedback from different partners across the state, from our family, our youth, our caregivers, and others out there. How does that differ from these other items? That means instead of just saying, well, we want you to be a part of the Children's Commission, come and join us and be a part of that. What are we doing to reach out and say, like, what do you have to say? Maybe you're a foster parent, maybe you've done kinship caregiving, maybe our youth that's actively involved or graduated out of the foster care system, you're a family member that had reunification or didn't have reunification. How are we getting out there and listening to you? So engaging with all the different groups that are a part of that, putting that out so we're getting and collecting that information. A big item that they asked for us to really pay attention to that we learned from the listening sessions we did with the court improvement folks was how so many people that have been engaged in state systems afterwards, a year, 2 years, 10 years later, are really holding on to some very difficult feelings about how that process went for them because of things we thought we were doing well that maybe weren't looking that well to them, or how they felt maybe they were just being pulled along without really being included in some of the decision making or the process, or without even a fundamental knowledge of the process that was happening around them. That's really important for us to get, because those are things that impact time to permanency, they impact outcomes, they impact people's willingness to re-engage. So maybe had a successful reunification, everything's great, but now you've had such a poor experience with state systems and services, at least in your mind, that you want to distance yourself. Well, risk factors can go up because now you're detracting from those systems that are here to help you even further. So all of that was something the Senate requested we add in. The House agreed to that. So that was good to see that, if anything, our bill grew as it went through the process there. I will also point out that it had unanimous votes all the way through the entire process, which was very, very cool to see. So full support, bipartisan support. Every legislator said we need to do better at making sure our families, our youth, our caregivers are being listened to, and that feedback is being integrated into state policy. So I can't emphasize enough how big of a win that is for the work that Commission's been doing for a long time. And Ailey and Julia were big inspirations on this one, as was our first cohort of youth representatives. We've learned a ton from them about how much better we need to do at listening, how much more listening we can do, how we can value integrating those voices in there. And they are always the best at sometimes giving the opinions that other people around the table don't want to give about what works, what doesn't work, what's a good idea, what's not a good idea. And it's made the difference in so many of our decisions moving forward. So very successful piece of legislation. Great to see. I know people have mixed feelings of the legislative process at times, so it's good to see such a clear success moving through there. Okay, another item that we're working on. This is related to the Youth Justice Oversight Committee. Most frequently, see the clicker's going fast and slow at the same time. The Youth Justice Oversight Committee under 1403. So some of you have been directly involved with this, if not most of you. But this is a group that was created through a committee of the Children's Commission, then kind of spun off into its own direction, looking at how we can do work to improve our youth serving justice systems. So that has been in place for several years now. It created an open report as far as some of the recommendations for what the state can do and should do. It also resulted in a large pool of funding for behavioral health, community alternatives, and diversion grants that were open to local communities. So 1403 takes that and kind of takes it to the next phase of what that group's could be. So great, you put out recommendations, you got the funding. How are you going to make sure that that gets supported going forward? So it turns it into a body that's much more about helping get those dollars out the door to local communities with the proper supports, with best practices behind them, with models that we can bring in, and other things we can do to make that an easier, streamlined process. One thing that we heard loud and clear is a lot of small communities, grants are really difficult to go for because they require a lot of work and a lot of reporting. And if you've got a staff of 2 people, you can't dedicate one person's full-time job to managing a grant, no matter how good your intentions are of what's going to happen with that. So this bill also brought some things to say, how can we adapt the funding formula? How can we look at those local needs more specifically? What are some things that we can remove that might be barriers to implementation that we think aren't really necessary in order to get the funds doing what they were designed to do, and out there doing that? It also adds that initiative that we talked through 1098 will be integrated into the Youth Justice Oversight Committee. So family, youth, and caregiver voices integrated into the Youth Justice Oversight Committee as well. Additionally, it adds some language clarifying that the Children's Commission will continue offering staff support and working with that. What we're really looking at for this next phase of the Youth Justice Oversight Committee is how do we reintegrate into the Children's Commission a lot of the bodies that are under that, so we're not having duplication. Everybody here is in enough meetings. You might not want to be in 3 meetings with very similar titles on the same day. How can we make that so those are aligned better? Now that we're into that part of supporting and creating positive policy around implementing these youth justice reforms, it's gone back to being a good fit to keep that under the Children's Commission. We'll have, as we get more into strategic planning, what that will look like and how we can do that responsibly. And also looking at the state giving some very clear mandates in the last legislative session of, where you can streamline and focus and be more efficient. Please do that. So we know there's room to do that there. So some good work there as far as how we're going to continue working on getting those funds out the door. And I would pause to say, too, this isn't a case where the Youth Justice Oversight Committee and those grant funds are an issue. This has been an issue in a lot of areas where we're trying to get funding to the small and rural communities across the state, where we get some funding, we get that ready, we get that in process where it can get to them, but we're not seeing applications. So this is a good chance for us to use the Children's Commission as a venue to say, how do we get better at doing that? So the intentions of the dollars occur on the local community level, and those differences can really be made as intended. So we're looking forward to how we can really get better there. So everybody can be a part of that discussion as we move on. Okay. Next, this was not a Children's Commission direct bill, but the one that we worked on quite a bit, and Senator Donato was the lead on it. Senate Bill 482. This is the next phase of looking at chronic absenteeism across the state. So last year, 282 was kind of the starting and discussion point on it. This is the next piece of that. So it added a little bit more definition and added some clear tasks of what we're going to be doing to look at chronic absenteeism around the state. And you'll see some themes in the bullet points there of what's really being charged to do. Is a big part of it is our data alignment is not good. We have localities that are looking at the data, reporting that, seeing different trends, but as it's getting reported up through DOE, not everybody's using the same system, the same classification, so we're losing a lot of the data as far as when somebody's chronically absent, what's actually going on. Is this purely a student choice of not wanting to be at school? Are there transportation issues we're seeing regularly? Are we seeing medical and mental health issues? What's the full picture there? So this really just unlocks some of the tools to do that better. One, it offers just a very nice, broad, but clear definition of what it means to be chronically absent. So 10% or more of a school year for any reason. So we have that. And again, that's not weighing it, saying is this student's choice, not student's choice. What's the number that this student's not able to participate in school 90% of the time? And you can see under that, Department of Education has some tasks that were assigned to them. So creating some best practices, study and prepare a report, looking at the categorization framework for suspensions and expulsions, establishing a categorization framework for excused absences based on the specific reasons for that, and then collecting information regarding those absences from the local school corporation. So making sure we're looking on both sides of the equation. So they've got a lot of work to do over the next few months and year on that. Yes. Yeah, I've heard that they're going to pull that through because they want to get some of this, they want to drill down a little bit further as well. And note that this is also involving charter schools and others. I know one issue that came along during session is charter schools and transportation, for example. So that's one I know they want to dive into a little bit more. There's some contentious issues there, but the idea being to charter schools, a lot of the creation was in urban centers to begin with, and there wasn't deemed to be as likely of a transportation need, but I will take a brief segue to say, like, you know, 6 blocks to school doesn't sound like a whole lot. I know how far I rode my bike back and forth, but are they 6 safe and approachable blocks? And that sometimes is another question, saying, do I feel safe sending my kid along that pathway to school? It was. It was a very tricky thing. Because it was, yes. And it was always snowing. Always. Always snowing. It was Michigan, so I'm not lying too much there. So a few other things that they brought into that is now that provides that the absence policy adopted by a school corporation has to match up into that work the DOE is doing of creating their categorization framework. So just looking at saying there needs to be a baseline of what DOE is looking at and what the school is looking at and reporting. We're matching that up. So we can have data that's useful on all sides. Also, because DOE would love to support some of the local schools better, but if they're looking at data in a completely different way than local schools are, they don't know what that overall picture is, or what the picture is for rural schools versus urban schools, what the picture is for that specific school corporation. So you can get better interventions when you have better data. So hopefully we see a lot of that getting better. They added a optional meeting for prosecuting attorneys where they can make reasonable efforts to secure support services for a child, kind of one last meeting to say, how do we intervene with this family? I can say that that's going to vary as far as how that gets implemented in a lot of areas of the state. There's a lot of very, very small prosecuting attorney offices, and there's a lot of them where it might be more fitting to see that that's going to be through a probation process. That's going to be something that happens at the school level. But the idea being that the legal aspects are being integrated into the decision making as we go and in the solutions as we go. What we're going to see finally of that as a product is, I think, still up in the air a little bit. But again, the idea that we're not just passing from one system to the other, but the whole structure throughout, we're making sure all the stakeholders are involved, because there's a lot that goes on with chronic absenteeism that can involve lots of factors outside of the school. It can involve lots of factors outside of the legal system, and can involve factors outside the social service system. All we know is that all three of them have to be part of the solution. It did bump out attendance conferences. I believe in 282, it was set for 5 days after the fifth absence. They had to set that conference. It bumped it out to 10 days to make it easier to get all the key players and the parents able to attend. One piece of policy it added that I think has been brought up a lot, but some people actually assumed was already in state policy when I listened to the debates on it, is prohibits a school from expelling or suspending a student solely because they are chronically absent or a habitual truant. So this one gets brought up a lot. Definitely not something that I think a lot of schools were wanting to do or doing frequently. But the policy idea is pretty clear in saying, look, if you're not attending school, the proper disciplinary action for that isn't don't come to school. I think we all agree with that philosophically, but that put that into code there. Note that there can still be times where somebody who's being habitually truant is still creating other forms of disruptions in the school environment, and there's behavioral concerns and other things going on. It doesn't prohibit those, but you can't just say we're expelling you just because you're not at school, right? So a good piece of policy to have in there, I think we all agree on philosophically there as well. Okay, 1605, I joked that Representative McGuire could come up and cover this one for the next 2 hours, but I did not get a yes on that. 1605 is a very large piece of legislation, and you'll see that I don't have more than a fraction of some of the tenants in it listed here for you today. I will not go through it in grand detail, but what it's really looking at is an overall improvement in time to permanency. So we heard some of the court measures. We saw some good ones there. We saw some getting better. We saw some that I don't think anybody was feeling great about seeing either. So the overarching goal is, can we make sure those deadlines are tight and enforced so cases aren't going on longer than necessary? So a lot was put into there to do that. You can see it reiterates the state policy needs to be the safety of children who are abused and neglected, so that child first policy, and also that reunification has limitations. That it is not designed to go on forever. When there's reasonable efforts that have been made towards reunification, we need to have a stopping point there. So there's a lot that goes into that, and there's a lot that DCS, FSSA, the courts and other players are going to be doing to say, now in practice, what is this going to look like? What do we need to change? What do we need to get better on? I think we can see that there's a lot of those pieces that are already on everybody's radar, but it's a matter of how do we get there and how do we make sure we're doing those? So again, added some new procedural deadlines, limiting that duration of reunification services were two of the bigger items within that. Other items that it did add, though, that we've heard from some of our listening sessions and others, is how do we make sure we're integrating some other voices into the decision making there too. So it did provide for an individual with whom the child is placed during a CHINS proceeding, that they may attend in its entirety. Any hearings conducted as part of the CHINS proceeding or TPR proceedings. Most judges we've talked to said this is already understood that this can be done, but there was some discrepancy in far as how that was being interpreted. Also provides that courts can shall allow an individual who's providing care or supervision, especially those long-term foster parents. I believe it's looking at, in most of these cases, a 12-month relationship being in place there, that they can be involved as far as intervening on the case itself, so they can have a more direct involvement in that. So if they've been attached long-term into the child's care, that they can be a more directed party in those cases. Also provides that the rights of the child's parents, guardians, custodians, guardian ad litem, court-appointed special advocates, as parties involve right of discovery, subpoena, examination of witnesses, and presentation of evidence. Again, some of these are ones that we felt were in practice, but maybe not codified directly. The goal of this is that we have all the information that we need from all the parties we need it from on a regular basis. Again, there'll be some practices that need to be established around this and what this looks like. I'm neither a judge nor a lawyer, so that's where my part of that discussion ends. I know we have a lot of people working on it and convening groups and subgroups to do interpretation. And again, there's about 40 more subpoints under 1605 that I could but will not go into. What does this mean for the Children's Commission is really what it comes down to. And I think that overall improvement on time to permanency is a shared goal that everybody says. Whatever the final placement is going to be for a kid that lets them feel they are safe, they are secure, and they are properly cared for is where we want to get them. So I see that as something that as we get involved in our strategic planning through the commission too, we may look at perhaps a subcommittee or task force that's looking at time to permanency issues. So we can really delve into that from all sides of the issue and continue to offer recommendations in light of 1605 and the many lawmakers and decision makers that are all trying to do better in the space. How can we be a convening partner in that? It also gives opportunities definitely to say we want to keep doing well with the data and presenting the data out there. So we're not making assumptions, but we're looking at specific cases and the total data to say what are the trends and where are we actually, maybe we do have some good things in place that aren't there yet, but are moving us in the right direction. We don't want to throw those things away when we're seeing positive progress. And also for specific initiative, there's a lot of room here for talking about our family recovery courts, our problem-solving courts in general, the new safe baby courts. When done ideally, they should be a mechanism for adding efficiency to that process too, right? So how can we continue that discussion at building those systems out, supporting those systems, collecting better data around those systems so we can show outcomes and improve what's going well and look at what's not going well and work into that a little bit more. So again, 1605, definitely one will be looking at some of the elements of that, I think, over the next several years of where that goes next. Okay, I can pause on legislation. Do we have any questions there? All right, again, some very good successes for the Children's Commission. And I will note too, the fact that 1098 went through as it did with additions to it and with a lot of positive dialogue towards it. You know, it was a year where a lot of streamlining was being looked at, committees, commissions, task forces, and other groups saying, how can we tighten that down? How can we decrease the load on those? How do we move membership down? We were one of the very few that was saying, we like what you're doing and we want more of it. So that's a huge vote of confidence from our state that we are in the right direction, we were thinking about the right thing. So that's really something that you should all take very, very seriously as a point of pride of the work that we're doing here. So wonderful to see. All right, so now I said no data, but we are going to have to talk budget. So I know. It is that time of year. So we have gotten our budget submitted and into the courts. I can say the most important item that everybody's been asking and keeps asking is where is the Children's Commission budget at after the legislative process? Our funding is holding steady for the next 2 years. So we are in a good place in that we realize that there are a lot of folks that had to make some pretty tough decisions going forward into that. Now, we had started by requesting a little bit more funds for those new responsibilities under House Bill 1098 of what we could do there and how we could get invested there. We were not able to get additional funds because frankly, it wasn't a climate where it was appropriate to push that one. There are way too many other entities that were saying, look, if we could stay flat, we would be extraordinarily happy with that. So that's really where we ended our discussion on that. Which is, again, just what makes sense in the current climate. Things might be looking better in a couple of years. We certainly hope so, and we can make those requests again at that time. So we did have to make some tweaks to our budget. The good news is we are still looking at being able to hire for the new elements under 1098. We're switching that to a contractor position. So that allows it to be a little bit less expensive on some of the overhead costs. I can say that I'm very happy. Our contractor, that person that was willing to come on board with us, is actually one of the people that was our absolute first choice to begin with when we started an open hiring process for it. So they'll be starting on July 1st. Their name is Samantha Munt. She's actually presented to this group a couple of times on Youth Risk Behavior Survey and was one of the leads on the Youth Advisory Board that's joined through DMHA and the Health Department. So somebody that can hit the ground running. Very, very happy to have that. We had a lot of candidates for the position of coming in and doing the family and youth coordination work, which was great to see. Great to see so many people wanting to be a part of that. Always a difficult process, but we were glad to be able to find somebody that could work with us on that. We will have some reductions we make, so we usually have paid internships. We will not have those for at least this coming year. We're still looking at having at least one intern, but it will have to be unpaid. That's a discretionary type of item. We have to look at essentials first. We have some more legislative charges, so those go up the list there. Still looking at how we can continue that going forward, and again, hopefully restoring that to a paid placement. Staff travel was cut down. You see, you don't have coffee and pastries in the corner today, right? So uh, I know. At coming meetings, we will bring you a single blueberry muffin. And again, we want to be responsible on those things. At the December meeting, we won't be having a reception as we have previously, where we bring that in as an opportunity to welcome in new volunteers and do some of those things. But those are costs that we have to reduce in the current climate. I know. I know. Special events are also something that will be contingent only on when we get the special funding for those events. Now, I can say already we're exploring opportunities that look like we're going to be able to restore most of those just fine. The good thing is most of those are related to our lived experience voice work, and we've got a lot of state and national partners that really like what Indiana is doing and are excited about continuing to join with us. So we did reduce those formally out of our budget, but as funding is made available, we're hoping we still have things like our Family and Youth Engagement Summit, our State House Day, all those things. We'll have to make sure it's within the certain budgets that we'll have at the time, but that's an area that we don't want to go down on, right? We were just given a charge to do more there. We're not going to say cut those things. So really everything else that was in that discretionary list, including the blueberry muffin, had to go first on that. But also our compensation that we do for our lived experience folks attending meetings, traveling to things, being able to go to conferences and events, that stayed stable as is too. Not something we're going to reduce there. So we're pretty satisfied with how we had to do that. So plan A wasn't going to work in the current funding climate, but plan B is coming together quite well. And really is going to look very similar to what we were expecting in the first place. So we're happy to see how that was able to land there going forward. And hopefully we do all the great things under 1098, and that makes a good value proposition moving forward for better financial times for the state. All right, strategic plan. Some of you may know that our current strategic plan goes through 2025, which means it's almost time to start the next strategic plan. Everybody loves strategic planning, I'm assuming. We'll have muffins. So I can tell you where we're at on that now. We've already started working with our different task forces, some subcommittees to say, start thinking about that next line of goals. We have several of them that are kind of at that natural point of winding down the goals they were given on the current strategic plan. We want them to spend the next 6 months really developing what that next range of goals and objectives are going to be. A lot of them are going pretty deep into that already. So I think that's really going to help inform our strategic planning process. We'll be doing more surveys, polls, online focus groups conducted to make sure that we've got other stakeholders that aren't immediately connected with the SISC or that might possibly be recruited into the work we're doing with the SISC, that we're asking them about priority items moving forward there as well. And when those go out, yes, they'll go out to this whole group as well as our large listserv, and we'll be asking for those to be shared very broadly. We want to get a good picture on that. There will be a full day strategic planning session. We'll have to poll when everybody's available for that because we do want to make sure we get as many members of not just the commission, but our task forces and subcommittees involved on that. They're the ones that have to implement it. I'm never a big fan of saying, here's your new goal, and it's the first time you've seen it. So we want to make sure that we have that fully informed there. So our upcoming meetings in October and December will be ones where we look at a draft and then finalizing that draft for what that looks like going forward. Um, and of course, as I already mentioned, a big part of that will be realignment of task forces, making sure, okay, does the current structure still make sense? Do we need to move things into different pockets? And looking at how we integrate that Youth Justice Oversight Committee into the work we're doing as well. So there'll be a lot of work, I think, on maybe streamlining our processes and seeing how we can be doing that effectively and efficiently, and have less members that are floating between 5 or 6 different initiatives, but also making sure that all of our goals and objectives are clear and measurable. I know when I came into the current strategic plan, we had a mix of folks that were saying, I get it, I know exactly where I'm heading, and others that were saying, like, I'm going to need some guidance about what does a recommendation based on this goal actually need to look like. So we want to make sure we're clear about that so we can really be checking those boxes as we go through and have a strategic plan where we really can say, have we completed the items? All right. And then lastly, I have just quick update on the Best Youth Initiative. So this is, again, our work where we're with 5 other states working on specific state policies. We have chosen chronic absenteeism. So you can see we have good stuff going on throughout that work. We've also, as we dive into chronic absenteeism, we've been broadening our lens on persons who have lived experience and integrating them into the discussion, because we found when we were talking about why people aren't attending school, we need to hear from the voices of the people that are in those family systems. They have the reasons why they're not attending, and actually most are pretty clear and articulate about what those reasons are. They're not trying to hide any of those things. They can tell you, so we need to listen better to them. So we've been continuing that work. We'll be going out to July or to DC in July to visit with some of the other state teams, developing our strategic plan in more detail. Ellie's on that team. We have some other team members here behind us, going out comparing with the other states. They're all working on different initiatives. So it's also a good plan to just look around and see what everybody else is doing, what's working as far as how they're getting their agencies to work together. I know Ellie's been put on a panel, so she's super excited for that. So she'll be showcasing for us a little bit there, and being present in that discussion. And I can say, when we've been there, they've been very excited about the work Indiana's doing, particularly our work and lived experience. 1098, they've been asking for copies of it every step of the process through the way as model practice for other states to adopt. So always cool when we can see that. We feel like we're just getting started. Other states are saying, like, you guys are way ahead of the game. And you've got a model there that we want to follow through the Children's Commission, through your work with lived experience and everything that you're doing. So we'll be getting some more ideas from them. We'll be solidifying our strategic plan items specifically about chronic absenteeism, what that looks like. We're working with DOE on their side of the goals with that. And then a big part of that will be when we get to strategic planning, how do we get that fully aligned into our existing task forces and committees? The Best Youth Initiative is a 3-year project. We're nearing the halfway part of that, but we don't think chronic absenteeism is going to be magically solved in 3 years. That's an issue that's an ongoing one. And we know there's a lot of work to be doing there. So we'll be looking at how we integrate that into the final products going on. Of course, continuously looking at potential legislative items, agency action items to identify along the way, many of which, and Senator Donato has been wonderful at integrating those into legislation, as she's been a champion for the cause there, and also very understanding to say, every time we add something in there, there's going to be another thing that can get better and another thing we can keep working on. So we'll be continuing in that space as well. Now, I do want to take just a couple of minutes of my time too to make sure that we are thoroughly embarrassing and pointing out Allie and Julia's time with us. I really can't say how much of a benefit they've been. And I know everybody here gets to see them at these meetings and participating and being a part of that. They are so engaged behind the scenes in everything we do. Every time we're working with other youth, we're looking at family and caregiver engagement. We're talking about specific issues. They are there, they are present, they're highly responsive, and they're giving me the feedback that I want them to give me, not that I want to hear. So when something is wrong, they will say, that's not how that's going to work. And we want that, right? Sometimes, frankly, they're more candid than some of the professionals that we have in the room, and I appreciate that so much. But also, they've grown value in everything we've done and been tremendous ambassadors, because when they go out and talk about the Children's Commission to their peers, to others who have lived experience, they get the interest up about what we're doing, how we're doing it, because it's really easy for our state systems to go out there and say, we want to hear from you, bring your voices here. But there's a mistrust there, and there's sometimes a well-earned mistrust there. If we can have our youth going out and saying, like, no, actually, they are listening, and actually, they do want you there, and they don't want you there just for you to be there, because they know that they need you there. That makes all the difference in the world. So the amount of lived experience voice we've been able to bring on with our two cohorts now that we've had of youth representatives has been incredible. And we keep growing that. It keeps making more work for Blaine as he gets more volunteers, I think, on an almost daily basis, the want to be involved in the work we're doing. But that goes really so much of that to Ailey and Julia's work, being ambassadors for the work we're doing. Again, this is their last meeting. We are not going to let go of them completely. We've got Ailey on the hook with Best Youth. We know Julia is still going to be involved with us in a lot of ways. And I'll note also, both of them have decided that the work that we do is important enough, they've made it part of their professional journey too. And that's not an easy thing to do. And that's not, we know this is difficult work, and we know taking your lived experience as one part of your expertise and then developing yourself as an expert in other ways, it's quite a journey. So very thankful to see that we still get to have you working with the state and helping youth in the state in the work that you're doing. So again, we will miss you, but we won't let you get too far away. And we appreciate absolutely everything you've done for us. It's been a wonderful journey. All right. That's all I have.
Segue right into commission member announcements. We've got 25 minutes or so I'll just go around the table. Bernice?
Bernice Corley, we will be very quick. I just wanted to introduce Julia Stevens, who will be giving IPDC's update. But just to, before I introduce her, I wanted to say, remember in our April meeting, we did have a report from Court Improvement about their listening tour that they did with parents who were involved in the child welfare system. As part of their listening tour, they got some feedback about how the parents felt when they were represented by public defense. And so some of the feedback that we heard was expressly about the parents having trouble being contacted by their public defenders, not getting the information that they needed. We took that very seriously, and Julia is going to give a report on what activities we have done since then to show that we take that seriously, and we're so thankful for the feedback. So Julia is going to come forward and take it from there.
Thank you very much, Bernice. So as Bernice stated, on April 9th, we were informed by way of CIP report that a whole bunch of parents across the state felt that communication was a barrier in their legal representation. So the Indiana Public Defender Council is statutorily required to support and train all of the public defenders across the state, which includes family defense attorneys. And my job is to specifically work with the family defense attorneys. So when we heard this report, Bernice and I are texting, like, we've got to get on this, we've got to work on this. I think we met days later and came to the conclusion that given our enabling statute, obviously training would be the most appropriate way to help our members. So we put together a 3-part ethics training on client communications for our members. The first of that ethics training, actually Jamie Devine from Court Improvement Program, who gave the report, she worked with me on the first portion of this training because we met with some of the families that she had met with previously. 2 of the families were brought to us by our interactions with the Indiana Birth Parent Advisory Board. And one of the families was brought to this conversation by way of their defense attorney who said, I know someone who could be in on this conversation. So we met with them. We just yesterday had a 1 hour webinar with them, which was just a panel discussion. The audience was, I think, purely, we might have had one social worker, but mostly family defense attorneys, indigent family defense attorneys. And they just got to share their experiences and the barriers to communication with their attorneys. We're also working on part 2 of this training would be, we'd like to engage a national entity that could be as speak broadly as to client communication ethics. We did get in touch with the National Association of Counsel for Children. They proposed a 2 hour training at the cost of $8,000, which I can tell you they are well worth, but it's not quite in our budget these days. So while I'm continuing to we also got in contact with the National Child Traumatic Stress Network for a training. And while I was sitting here, I got an email from them saying they're doing a national training. So I'll follow up with them. We haven't heard back from them. But while we're looking for a more budget-friendly national entity to help train our family defenders, I will be presenting a 1 hour webinar, a continuing education webinar for our defense attorneys, kind of pulling back from what we heard from our parents yesterday, particularly concerning Indiana-specific barriers to communication, which include, having a county system instead of a statewide system. So we miss some of the kind of overarching, not standards, but programs that might be in place. We're going to discuss some technology because I think that sometimes we forget that we can just text a client and then the problem is solved, right? And obviously we'll be focusing specifically on the ethical rules as it pertains to Indiana. I think that training is going to be the first week of August. I have to get with our exceptional training director, Diane Black, to ensure that we have the dates that will work for everyone. But I know that the Public Defender Council just wanted to come back and kind of tie a bow on that we heard that and that we know what our job is and we're doing our job. So that is all we have. If anybody has questions or suggestions. Okay. Yeah.
Anyone else from the group want to come and present something that's going on in your respective world? Sure. Sure.
I know that there's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know if there was a way to kind of do a survey to say, is this the best day of the week or the best time of the month or whatever, just to be more amenable to those that could be here. And I know the DOE, I don't know if the DOE's, I've not seen anybody at the DOE in quite some time, Department of Education, and I'd really like to see them engage. Because we have a focus group back home that are dealing with teen pregnancies and stopping kids from having kids. And we're looking for a curriculum that we can use in our schools that somebody in the state might have one, or maybe somebody in the nation might have one that we could kind of use statewide that would be really to help eliminate some of the issues that we're dealing with kids.
Okay.
And I just love to see some kind of dialogue with that as well. And then I was just curious too, I know the governor's appointment has a couple of appointments to the commission, and if we had any success there yet or any dialogue. So, and I reached out to a couple other staff and I've not heard back either. So I'll do a little more deep today.
Mm-hmm. And on that point, Mark reached out, I think last month, and I followed up last week and we haven't gotten an appointment yet. So.
Coming on the other end of a lot of transitions over the last few months. So, and that plus summer vacation time, we understand, but yeah, we don't want to start making it a regular occurrence.
If any of you have ideas about meeting dates, times, attendance, I noted too that we have a skinny group today. We also had a skinny group for YJOC last week, and I think some of that may be summertime, some may be transition time, but It's a challenge. We do need people in the room, however. Yes.
Saying that the commission needs those.
Sure. We can work on that.
But,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that jumpstart in the, because, I mean, we thought about it in the beginning so that we would not necessarily have people doing substitution of people coming.
Correct, yes.
The head, when we created,
Mm-hmm.
we wanted the head person to be here listening to the issues and the problem. So maybe we need to talk about, you know, the reason the commission was found and the reason they were asked to specifically be on.
Great idea.
I think we can work on B21.
Mm-hmm. We can do that and send that past the exec committee before sending that out. I like that idea. Thank you. Sure. Any other input from the crew? To follow up on Julia's presentation, Julia Stevens behind me, not Julia Stumler in front of me. At the judicial conference last week for juvenile and family court judges, we had some presentations that grew out of this work as well. That included a presentation on that series of listening sessions. So judges are hearing what your public defenders are hearing, and that's our hope, that people take that information and pass it along, because Mark underscored one theme that really popped out at me, and that is these folks who attended these listening sessions were so invested in making the system better despite negative experience in the past. And that's really inspirational, I think, for those of us doing this work when we see that level of investment. And I have to really underscore that one of our foster parents has 7 children, some biological, some foster parents or foster children. And over the weekend before that listening session, all 7 of those children had had stomach flu. And she showed up for our listening session that morning. So level of investment is skyrocketing there. We also put together a handout for juvenile and family court judges on practice tips given to us by those biological parents, foster parents, and foster youth. So I think our judges were excited to hear that. I think it's easy for us to get into that sort of rote pattern of hearing after hearing and not really digging into why we're doing these things and stressing the importance of certain things. So input is very much valued here. And thank you once again, Allie and Julia. With that, any objection to adjourning? All right, we will be adjourned. Thank you, everyone.